Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for the 7th in about a 32-ish part series as we journey chapter by chapter through Stephen King's fairy tale, the newest book in the arsenal, the newest book from the machine, which is Stephen King. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a short comment section, because none of you love me anymore, and you're not saying anything in the comment section, so I have very little to react to. But then we're going to get into a So What Happened section of the video where we sort of recap what it was that went on in this chapter. Then we've got a little bit of Lit Crit, and then we have a little bit of writer's talk about the chapter that was. So the comments, let's get into them. What do we have here? This comes to us from Angelica. Sometimes I remember Stephen King starts a slow roll and then has a bunch stuffed into chapters in the second half of the book. Is that what we're getting here? So I think, though, unfortunately, if that is the case, there is no need to do that with this book. Often, most times, when you're reading Stephen King, you either have an entire new world, like in the Dark Tower series, or you are building a character that you're going to explore something, with whom you're going to explore something slightly spooky. So, I keep throwing it back to the same thing, The Shining. We introduce Jack, we introduce the entire family there. And then we get right into things, because the things that we're getting into are themselves rather mundane. It seems to me, especially if we are going to be following sort of the fairy tale type endeavors that we get alluded to which we are alluded in this chapter. I don't know what's going on with my glasses here. This time would be better spent exploring those ideas ahead of throwing us as readers into something spectacular from a world so mundane. So, even with something like It, where there is paranormal of paranormal happening, where you have turtles all the way down, where you have intergalactic spider clowns, it starts immediately. And by it, I do mean Pennywise. Starts immediately. We get Pennywise right up front. So the best thing about chapter 1 in that book is that we do not have the big bad lurking in the shadows. We get him right away. So we don't get that here. We don't have that here. We don't, as far as I can tell, have any element of the fantastical, but we've got some ideas thrown around, but they're still ideas. We get this from Jimmy. I agree that some of this writing sounds rather robotic. It sounds like a writer trying to get back into writing, doesn't it? It sounds like someone reminding himself that he is, in fact, a writer. And the chapter titles do suck. I talked a little bit last time, in the last video, about how the chapter titles were irritating, aggravating, sort of, worthless, and they give away too much at the same time, which, hey, I've got to admit, that's a tough trick to pull off. But so chapter 8 is titled this: Water Under the Bridge, Fascination of Gold, An Old Dog, Newspaper News, An Arrest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. It's a bulletin board of what's going to happen in the chapter. Well, fine. Why give it to us there? Especially lately, when there's been so little happening in the chapters that you're spoiling it up front when we have something. So chapter 7 was titled, I don't even know. Give me 1 second here. First night. Okay, it was his first night with Bowditch. Now you know Jack. Okay, so Jack and the Beanstalk. A simple woodcutter. This is what Bowditch is. This was Bowditch's profession. My father's visit, Lynn Parza, Mr. Bowditch makes a promise. That's the entire chapter. It's not even like... So sometimes you will get writers who try to encapsulate their chapter with a title. Okay, this is a title for a chapter. To encompass the chapter with a title, if you are a writer who's going to try to put a bow on the chapter, I don't know. So you have your character going through a whole bunch of trials and tribulations in that chapter. Maybe you name the chapter 7 Labors, so that we sort of get this idea that your character is coming through that chapter to be a hero, right? Something like that. The 7 Labors of Hercules, right? But this is just a list of things. It's almost... So you have to be of dual minds when reading it. Were these talking points that Stephen King knew he wanted to put into the chapter, so he wrote the chapter title first and then fleshed everything out? Or did he have to write the entire chapter under a number and then go back and say, okay, now what did we do here? What did we do here? What did we do here? Oh yeah, right. We had the drug, we had the night, we had the meeting the father, all of this stuff. Either way, simply as a writer, I can't imagine doing something so banal. I can't imagine putting time and effort into something so throwaway. Because, I mean, it's not even clever stuff. It's not even quirky stuff. It's not even stuff that makes you want to read the chapter. It's just a list of... Anyway, I gotta move on. So, what happened? Charlie's first night babysitting Bowditch. Things go pretty decent. They go pretty okay, and Charlie spends some time reading about Jack and the Beanstalk. Surprise. Then Bowditch has his first physical therapy session, which goes well enough. I mean, this is sort of an encapsulation of this novel to this point. Everything goes, yeah, pretty okay. I mean, besides the mother dying, but we were prepped for that for so long. We were prepped for that. We knew it was coming. Where am I at? It goes well. The first physical therapy session goes well enough, but Bowditch has no problems expressing the pain that he is in. Then we get Bowditch and Dad meeting. It goes okay, surprise. Then Charlie starts researching one of Bowditch's medications, and it turns out it is a cancer medication, but hardly the kitchen sink, because we get this, which I thought was a very good character moment for Bowditch. So, Charlie has researched Lanzapram, what is it called? Lanzapram, Lynn Parza. I worked for a guy named Lynn. Last name was Parza. No, I don't think it was. What was it? Can't remember anymore. Look, Charlie has discovered that this is a cancer medication, and he is talking to Bowditch about, hey, you could be doing a lot more than just taking this medication. And Mr. Bowditch says, yeah, I don't think I will. And Charlie says, why? There's something else, young man. Something a person your age can't understand. I've almost had enough. Not quite, but almost. Life gets old. You might not believe that. I know I didn't when I He paused. When I was young. But it's true. Lay back, he lay back, groped for radar, found her, stroked her. But I don't want to leave her alone, right? We're pals, she and I. And now I don't have to worry. If she outlives me, you'd take her. Wouldn't you? Yes, of course. So there is that little bit of pause there. Why does he pause? The phrase is when I was your age. Well, we don't get that from Bowditch. We don't get that, do we? That's not in there. It's just when I was, when I was younger. So what is going on there? There is something to do with time, perhaps. And this is, after all, supposedly, eventually, maybe, someday, going to turn into fairy tale type material. We're here through page 122 and have none of it yet. So we'll see, Stephen. Then, after this, Bowditch tells Charlie, hey, you've helped enough. You've got your old man at home, and you should be spending more time with him. Charlie, of course, disagrees. He is ever the caretaker. But let's talk about some of the stuff that's going on in here. There's just a couple notes of literature stuff here. Jack and the Beanstalk. So, Jack and the Beanstalk is another story kind of like the Jesus story. We talked about, in last episode, we talked about how Charlie is one-on-one with his father as opposed to his mother. And oftentimes, when you get stories of not quite orphans, but what is there a term for half orphans? Certainly it's not orphans. When you get stories of children with one parent, normally it's the mother. Here it's the father. But we have the prodigal son. We have the prodigy son. We have the son that is something more than normal. In the Jesus story, we get mostly stories with the mother, the Virgin Mary. Not so much Joseph. And even God, really sort of through the Jesus story, is sort of absent, right? That's why we have these lines, why have you forsaken me? Things like that. We have Jesus being tempted by the devil. Is there a scene like that with God? Now, I certainly don't know the Bible through and through, so maybe it's in there and I just don't know it. But is there a scene where we have Jesus being shown all of the splendor of heaven, as opposed to all of the earthly power that he could attain by joining a pact with the devil? The Jack and the Beanstalk story is fairly similar. The Jack and the Beanstalk story, like the Jesus story, you have one parent, but you also have the prodigy of the son who finds those magical beans, and the story from whom all of the magic springs, right? The Jack character is whence magic comes. But there is a little bit of stuff to really sort of explore if we're looking at the Jack and the Beanstalk story. He addresses it in this chapter. We don't know where the gold comes from. In the Jack and the Beanstalk story, the giant, Gog Magog, has stolen all the stuff that he has. Jack is then stealing it from him. Is it okay to steal stolen stuffs? Where did Bowditch's gold come from? Would it be okay for Charlie to steal it if it had been stolen by Bowditch? regardless of the ethical dilemma that might pose, it is still dangerous. There is still danger there. In fact, it might be more dangerous, right? To steal from a thief, you're not stealing from Joe Schmo, who is a law-abiding, upstanding citizen. You're stealing from the guy who stole his junk. The guy who stole his junk was willing to get into that fight and got away with it. To steal from a thief is twice as dangerous. Still, Jack does it. We have also in that story fairy tales. Fairy tales give us a great jumping off point for discussions. That's 2 points of discussion from the Jack and the Beanstalk story. Is it okay to steal stolen stuff? And if you're going to steal something from someone, wouldn't it be easier to steal something from someone who's not a thief? Right? Because it is less dangerous, probably. But another thing that is worth talking about with that particular fairy tale is Jack Gullible. His mother gives him it was a goat, right? Goat, sheep, lamb, goat, I believe. And says, hey, don't come back with less than 5 quid. Or pieces of gold. I can't remember exactly whatever the story is. And obviously there's a million different tellings of this story. Don't come back with less than this 5 pieces of gold. Jack says okay. And then Jack is given an offer he can't refuse. These are magical beans. Way more valuable than 5 pieces of gold. Don't you want these 5 magical beans instead of 5 pieces of gold? Well, yeah, Jack does. What an idiot. How gullible is he to be giving away his last bit of sustenance for magical beans? What a dummy. What a gullible fool. Except they really were magical beans. Is Jack gullible? And it is so. Why are fairy tales so often ripe with this type of give and take, right? This type of why are fairy tales pregnant with these dilemma? I think, and I'm sure there's scholarship on this, and I've just never come across it. I think it's because of the utility of fairy tales and how fairy tales evolved would have been that they were stories told to children by parents. This would have been way before schools, right? So, and these things, Jack and the Beanstalk, often very easy to remember. And they would have been incredibly easy for a parent to implant whatever pet dilemma they enjoyed into that story. And the evolution of storytelling is that only the most stunning of attributes survive in that story as it comes to us, right? So there were probably tellings of Jack and the Beanstalk wherein there was no goat, where Jack went out and stole these beans, or where it wasn't his mother, it was his father. But for whatever reason, selective processes weed out lesser storytelling. And we see this today. The easiest way we can point to this in pop culture today are comic books. So as a fan of, for example, Wolverine, some of my favorite things about Wolverine are things which were thrown in haphazardly at first, but ended up, the next writer took it and really liked that little thing about the character. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but one of the things that apparently was not 100% attributed to Wolverine for a while was the memory stuff. Wolverine can't remember anything. He's had his memory erased. Well, the interesting thing about comic books is there will be several iterations of how Wolverine lost his memory. But the coolest one sticks. It's not getting an adamantium bullet to the head like happened in the movies. No one likes that. So the next guy who gets to write the stories doesn't use that one because people hated it. So he says, well, pain can really screw with your memory. Happens all the time. Wolverine went through a whole lot of pain and just forgot some of it. But he was also a secret weapon by the government. So maybe he lost some of it that way. And if you can lose it, if you can lose your memories by the government erasing them, well, couldn't the government put fake memories in there? And that becomes a cool, I don't know if you can hear those sirens, always sirens. That becomes a cool plot detail with the Wolverine character. Sure, maybe he can remember Silver Fox. Was she even real? Right? All of these types of things. But with fairy tales, and this happens with religions too, we have all sorts of older texts of modern religions and ancient texts of ancient religions that had been weeded down for more memorable parts. So these ideas, such as, was Jack gullible? Such as, is it okay to steal from a thief? Such as, who's more dangerous to steal from? Why would Gog Magog be a giant and have stolen all these things? And if he's a giant, where did he find other giants to steal from? You have these little talking points for parents to instill ideas and questions into their children. So it would have been easy to much in the same way. Well, I'm not a parent, so I don't know. And I get the feeling that many parents just put certain movies or TV shows on to shut the kids up. But surely there are still uses for different texts, contexts for different texts. Now, moving on. Gog Magog. What is this? Why is this important? Gog Magog was the name of the giant in the Jack and the Beanstalk story. Gog Magog was apparently a giant, and I got this straight from Google, so blame Google if this is not correct. A giant in English and Welsh mythology. One of the giants that Brutus killed in Albion, which was Great Britain, the British Isles. But Gog Magog is apparently a reference to Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog is in the Christian Revelations, I believe, but it's also in the Hebrew Bible. And in the Hebrew Bible, the story of Gog and Magog. Gog was a leader. This is in prophecy, by the way. So this is supposedly happening in the future, from when it is written. We don't know when, but it is towards the end of days, whatever that is to mean. Gog is a powerful leader, and the prophecy is written as a letter to Gog saying, hey, you are the leader. You've got all this powerful stuff. There's this terrible war, this war to end all wars that's a coming. Won't you help us? Now, this is, from what I can find, still a very highly debated and contested type of prophecy. What is Gog and Magog? Are they two separate people? From what I can tell, most of the scholarship on this is that Gog is the leader of Magog. So Magog would be the place. Gog, which apparently is sometimes translated just as chief or leader, would have been the leader of Magog, the powerful place, the place that has all of the military might. And the prophecy is saying, hey, now, this is apparently, through some scholarship, through some scholarship, this is a war to end all wars, which is Israel against a mysterious power. So Israel writing to Gog to help Gog, the powerful leader, to help against the mysterious power. That is what I can gather. Look, not an expert on the Hebrew Bible. If you know better than that, be sure to let me know in the comments below. The other thing that I wanted to bring up as a talking point from this chapter is... Okay, yeah. We have a joke that Bowditch makes upon meeting Charlie's father about back in the day when we had Coca-Cola, there was always some rum in it. And it's just passed over. Charlie is proud of his father for handling it the way that he handled it. But we do get this little line on 119. Sometimes I did still resent him for his lost years, because they were my lost years too. Mostly, I was just glad he was back. They were my lost years too. That is a strange, I think, a strange way to put it. It seems to me most of the people that I know who went through a situation like Charlie in that household do not lament a loss of years. They sort of lament the expediation of their childhood. Not that they lost it. Not that the years were lost or condensed, but that they had to speed through their childhood and learn adult things, be adult-ish, so much earlier. And I'm not contending with King on this. I'm not saying he's wrong here. He shouldn't have put it that way. Nothing of the like. But I think that it is an interesting talking point to raise the question, is that the best way to explain this? Is the loss of years there? It seems to me that it is a loss of childhood. Childhood seems to me, and here, again, maybe I'm making a broad accusation of what childhood is. It seems to me that childhood is this amorphous sort of experience that so many people have, wherein things like years don't matter. They are not hallmarks the way they are to adults, the way they are to the adult mind. This is something that we often get, and I'm going to be blurring the lines a little bit between this and the writer's take on this chapter a little bit, but one of the things that we get from a school of writing called burnt tongue is to never mention numbers. Numbers, what does that even mean? They don't mean anything. I took 5 breaths. What does that even mean? Were you sitting there counting them as you are remembering this story? You remember each individual breath. I took 5 breaths. No, you didn't. I took 3 steps. No, you didn't. I reached out and I couldn't grab her, so I moved faster where I could. Right? That is the burnt tongue type of writing. There's no numbers involved because numbers don't explain anything. And I think what part of this is, childhood is amorphous, but the things that happen to us in childhood are so much more vivid. I think most of us can agree with that. I'm 37 years old now, and I can tell you that I don't remember any of my birthdays. I just don't. It doesn't matter. It's another day. I got up and I went to work, probably. I don't remember them as a child either, but you see what I'm saying? Like, there are no hallmarks in adulthood the way there were in childhood. I remember my first kiss in the 7th grade, right? I remember that day. You remember first times of things in ways that you don't remember 5th or 6th times of things without another hallmark getting involved. So the explaining lost years as a child strikes me as, I'm going to use the word again because I can't think of anything else to explain it, anachronistic. That's not the right word, but it is a similar idea to what it is that I think I'm trying to express here. Why? Is it just because of what I said? Because the lack of hallmarks for a child versus the having to regiment the way that an adult-like child of an alcoholic, for example, has to do, expedites that childhood process. So a child-like child might not really attend to themselves in a way that leads to going to bed on time. A childlike child wants to stay up as long as they're not tired. The child of an alcoholic that has to get themselves dressed and get themselves up and get themselves to the bus stop, etc., is going to take a little bit more of an adult-like approach to the evening hours because they know what it's like to be in school that next day and dragging. Because days where you're dragging take so much longer, that you get questioned, all of these things. You're the child of an alcoholic. How are you going to get fed? Well, you're a kid, and you are a childlike child who does not have to worry about the regimentation of being fed because someone else is doing the thinking portion of that for you. It just becomes, well, mom will tell me when dinner is ready. But the child who has to look out for his or herself must take these things more seriously because, especially at that age, by the time you're hungry, it's already too late. It's one of the things that you hear oftentimes in the fitness world. By the time you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. You've already screwed up. When you're that age, by the time you're hungry, things are already going to suck. So you want to understand how that food is being made, where it's coming from, when you need to start cooking it, things like that. A childlike child does not pay attention to the order of processes for making spaghetti, but an adult-like child understands that if you leave those noodles boiling too long, they're not going to be good, right? I think that's an interesting thought process there. Moving on to the writer's type notes. on page 112, something curious to me. And I think that this stands out because it is a question of what details are important to your reader. We get this as Charlie is reading about Jack and the Beanstalk. I found at least 7 different versions of Jack and the Beanstalk, reading them on my phone by the light of that single lamp. Really, Stephen? You were reading your phone by lamplight? No, you weren't. But Stephen King, I'm just putting it out there. Not a judgment, just putting it out there. Stephen King, probably born in the 40s? Probably born in the 40s, I think. 50s? Maybe? 50s? No, because he's always talking about movies from the 50s. He talks about going to the theaters in the... Maybe, I don't know. Either way, advanced in age. Okay. Most of Stephen King's life, any of the reading that he was doing, had to be done by lamplight. Maybe even by firelight. Maybe he's that... I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So, in Stephen King's mind, when he's putting together this image, it is important to him that the lamplight be there. But when you're reading your phone has its own light on it. So it is the illumination. Not necessary to have a light there. That is an interesting little insight to how it is that we build a scene and how it is that we prioritize details about that scene. Now, talking about priorities of detail, we talked, I think it was 2 chapters ago, maybe even 3, I can't remember exactly. No, I think it was 2. How did you envision Bowditch? Because Bowditch is there in that chapter, described kind of feebly. He is a skinny, wasted away older fella. I didn't see him that way. But it was given to me late enough that I, in my mind, have already constructed that character. I'm not going back on it. In my mind, Bowditch is sort of pot-bellied. And he's going to be that way for the rest of the book, no matter what it is that you say, Stephen King. On the kissing page to our last quote, we have here, "I think I've done most of my growing," Charlie says. "At least, I hoped so. I was 6'4" and weighed 220. If I grew any more, I'd be a Gog Magog," I said without thinking. Did you envision Charlie as 6'4", 220? Did I miss something? Now, there will be arguments from some. Well, he's an all-state football player. Of course he's 6'4", 220. First off, not always the case. Second off, we don't know what position he plays. So that's a very big deciding factor. 6'4", 220 in high school, you're looking at a defensive end. You could even be looking at an offensive tackle or a defensive tackle. 6'4", 220 in high school? But you're also throwing around the fact that this guy was a baseball player. 6'4", 220. Woof. That's a big fella. If, in fact, Charlie was meant to be this big, probably we should have got some hint of that before. Just saying that he's an all-star athlete doesn't expressly communicate that he's 6'4", 220. Especially, was he 17 here? 17, 18? Yeah. So did you see Charlie as that size? I did not. That completely changes the dynamic of many of these scenes, because many of these scenes we are meant to be seeing Charlie as picking up Bowditch. We are meant to see Charlie. Maybe it doesn't, but I think it does. I think when you're talking about the difference between someone who's an all-star athlete and someone who's 6'4", 220 and an all-star athlete, we've got a very different story being written. We've got very different characters on the page. But we have had some talks about this next little bit of writing because it's Stephen King telling on himself. Remember, this is the guy that wrote Misery, okay? This is the guy that wrote Carrie, with a girl having pig's blood poured on her at prom and kind of going psycho. This is the guy who wrote about a father taking an axe to a door in order to get at his wife so that he may then kill his son. This is a guy who gave us trans-dimensional spider clowns. This is a guy who gave us any number of things. On page 115, we get this passage. We have this entire chapter of sort of rigmarole. I tell you these things not because they are particularly interesting, but because they established a routine, one that continued through the rest of the spring and most of the summer. In some ways, those were good months. I felt useful, needed. I liked myself better than I had in a long time, only the end was terrible. I tell you these things not because they are particularly interesting. Thank you. Thank you. But you told on yourself. You knew. Putting these things down. One of the things that Stephen King says in On Writing, and I think I've given this quote before in this series, is that people love reading about other people's work. He doesn't know why. Stephen King explains. He doesn't know why. But it's true. People seem to love reading about other people at work. This is boring. A lot of this stuff is boring. I took Radar for a walk. I changed the old man's diaper. I took Radar for another walk. The old man laid down for sleep. And I read about Jack and the Beanstalk. And when I woke up, we had breakfast. So much, so he's telling on himself in the way that we know this is boring. He knows this is boring. He knows that we know this is boring. But it's almost as if he didn't know where to start telling the story, except that he does. Stephen King knows where to start telling the story. And Stephen King even knows the shortcuts that you take to make it seem like this is something that has happened time and time again. Stephen King knows that if you give characters a shorthand language, it tells the reader that this has been done before. Charlie wakes up in the morning and says, eggs. Bowditch says, over easy. Right? That tells us that this is a little game they play. That tells us that Bowditch knows the minute that Charlie says eggs, he's asking, how do you want them? I have prepared them every other way. I have scrambled them. I have made them over easy. I have poached them. I have made you, pardon me, an omelet. Now, the next step, eggs over easy. He'd been doing it that way for a month. Something made me think, why did he fall in love with the over easy eggs? I don't know, but I was tired of them by now, right? So you give us that shorthand, and then you give us the important stuff. You give us that shorthand, and then you give us the important moments where we get the explanation of the gold. You give us the moments where maybe we don't get the scene where Charlie is reading 7 different types of the Jack and the Beanstalk story. But the very first scene we have the reference to Jack and the Beanstalk. The next scene, we have Bowditch explaining the Gog Magog part. That's how you do it. You don't give us the rigmarole. You don't have to. You don't have to. That's sort of the thing that's been infuriating about this book a little bit for me, is Stephen King is better than this. One little thing that I will say, and this is my last talking point, and I got to find it because I didn't write down the page number for it, so I don't know where it's at. We have the scene where Charlie is showing, where is it here? Charlie is showing Bowditch, I must not have marked it either. Charlie is showing Bowditch the voice on his laptop. And the first thing Bowditch says is, "Wow, that picture, it's so clear," something to that effect. And Charlie gives us the line, and there's not even any commercials. One very small touch there that would have been a huge payoff for a Luddite like myself is if Bowditch had asked the question, "No commercials. Well, how do they pay for it?" Because that shows us a couple things about that character. Number one, he's really not kidding. This is him. He's in this world. He does not participate in life as it is. But number two, it gives us that Bowditch is and the only reason I'm saying this is because we're in the writing portion of it. Like, if this were presented in a sort of writer's circle, this is a little comment that I would give on it. If you give us that from Bowditch, it tells us how practical a person he is. And it tells us that he's always looking for someone else's motivations. And that is something that has been extremely clear to us about Bowditch. But it would be this little moment that lets us know he's not just paranoid about Charlie. He's not just paranoid about the people in the neighborhood. He's not just paranoid about those folks at the hospital. He wants to know how all of it works because everybody has an angle. If he takes that second to say, "No commercials," then how do they pay for it? It also lets us know that not only is he paranoid about everybody's motivations, but if he wants to know how they're paying for it, it means that he believes if he can't figure out how they're getting paid for it, they're getting something else out of it. And if they're getting something else out of it, it must be something they're getting from me, right? So that is the paranoid type of character that Bowditch is. But that is all I have for this video, the 7th video in this series, Chapter 7, as we go chapter by chapter through Fairy Tale, the newest novel from Stephen King. This is Wednesday. I hope to have you back Monday for Chapter 8, Water Under the Bridge, The Fascination of Gold, and Old Dog Newspaper News, and an Arrest. Hope to have you then.